This awesome story just got a brand new update, so I'm going to include the whole thing here so you can catch up. HOA president vandalized my truck and had it towed away to have a junkyard to dismantle it. They were forced to fully repair it, and I sued the HOA president. Posted by Knock on Wood HOA. This incident happened in January of this year. Last year, I moved into a neighborhood with an optional HOA. At the time, I'd come into enough money to buy a house outright. The only reason I moved here is because the HOA was optional and it's a nice, safe neighborhood. It's a slice of heaven compared to where I used to live. I own two vehicles, a 2004 Toyota Camry and a 1999 Ford F-150. The Camry is my daily driver, while the F-150 is my hauler for when I need it. I bought the truck around the same time that I bought the house to help me out with the move. And I used it to pull a rented trailer when I was moving my stuff in. The F-150 is old, but it's in good mechanical order, and I try to keep both of my vehicles clean with monthly trips through a car wash. The local HOA did not like me from the start due to my refusal to join. The HOA president was a retired old man who seemed like he had nothing better to do. So he tried multiple times to sell me on joining and sent me several applications in the mail. But I always declined. Politely at first. But when the president got more aggressive, I told him to shove it where the sun doesn't shine. That's when the HOA decided that I was a member anyway, and then they started sending me fines in the mail with that claim. I knew they were bogus, so I went to the next HOA meeting to dispute the fines. They tried to tell me that by living here, I'm in the HOA whether I liked it or not. This was an obvious power move and something that I was ready for. I could only laugh in amazement of their stupidity, and I said as much to them. Then I told the board that not only was I not a member, but I'd gotten a lawyer to write up a C&D for them. I handed the envelope over. The board skimmed it and then furiously told me to get out. The fine stopped for a few months and then started right back up again at random. So I popped into another HOA meeting and I told them that this was not legal. I'm not in their HOA and I'd take them to court if they didn't stop. Once again, I was furiously told to get out. The fines stopped for good, but the HOA president decided that I needed to be made an example of. It happened only a few days later. I came home to find my F-150 gone from my driveway. I checked the cameras and saw the HOA president himself walk onto my property. He took out a pocket knife and stabbed each of my truck's tires in the sidewalls, then unscrewed the license plates off, put them in a bag, and just casually walked away with them. Then, a little while later, a tow truck came and hauled my truck away. I called the police, and together we went to see the HOA president. But he wasn't home. With my situation explained, this was not considered a civil matter, but grand theft auto. The police traced the tow truck as being from a local junkyard and not from an impound lot. I accompanied the police there, and not only was the HOA president present at the junkyard, but my F-150 was there being taken apart by about 4 men. They'd already removed the headlights, the hood, the bumper, and the radiator, and all of the panels off of the front of the truck by the time we got in there. There was stuff disconnected all over the engine bay, and the catalytic converters had already been cut out. The HOA president looked like a deer in headlights when he saw me there with police. I was nearly angry beyond words when I saw my truck in that condition. Nearly, I say, because I went off like a foul-mouthed country sailor on the people who'd ripped my truck apart. The HOA president was caught red-handed, but he insisted that he'd only towed my truck because it was in a sorry state and looked abandoned. I said he illegally took it off of my private property since the HOA had no right to tow it off of my land, and he clearly had not been aware of my cameras as they'd seen everything that he did. He went pale at first and then furiously tried to stomp towards me looking like he was ready for a fight while yelling that my truck had been an eyesore, so he got rid of it. This action earned him some new bracelets and a free ride to the station. The police were somewhat merciful to the junkyard staff, who claimed to have only been doing their jobs. The owner of the junkyard is a cousin to the HOA president, so he was contracted to do any towing for the HOA since he was also owned a local impound. He had no idea I wasn't a member of the HOA and also was not aware that his cousin had ordered his employees to tear my truck apart for parts as an abandoned vehicle. The police cited all sorts of broken laws to the employees and the owner, and then they agreed to put my truck back together. But I said that it had better be at least as good as it was, if not better, or I'd be going to my lawyer. The owner told his employees to do whatever it takes, or he'd separate them from their jobs. Then he told me he'd bill the HOA president for everything later. Then the police and I got to watch as all of those employees had to painstakingly put my truck back together, piece by piece. And they repeatedly muttered things about me to each other and flashed me the stink eye from time to time. Yeah, I'm guessing the HOA president offered to bribe them all to take my truck apart as quickly as possible, but now they had to fix it for free. And they were at it for hours. They had to weld the catalytic converters back in and even had to replace some parts entirely due to damage caused during hasty disassembly. When they first fired up the engine, it had an obvious misfire. Yeah, they denied it, but police sided with me that they could tell that it had a misfire too. Turns out they had ruined one of the coil packs taking the truck apart, and they had to order new parts from a nearby auto parts store to fix it. One of the headlights also stopped working. Again, something that they had to fix because I stated that I could prove with my home cameras that they were both working when I last drove it. And the bulbs were nearly brand new LEDs, so they had to have broken something. The coolant lines had also been just cut instead of simply disconnected, probably because they were trying to take the truck apart in a hurry. So those were more parts that had to be ordered from the nearby store as well. I can only imagine the total cost that was billed to the HOA president for this. All 4 of the tires had to be replaced because they were not repairable. So they had to leave the truck on a lift and take all 4 wheels off. There were other problems too, and all of these junkyard mechanics had to work overtime to put the truck back together on the hopes that I wouldn't sue or press charges. I wasn't even able to take the truck home till the next day evening because the police had to get my plates back and the junkyard staff had to take the wheels in for new tires. By the time I got the truck back, the 2 junkyard employees I saw there gave me looks that just said not to come back. And the truck actually runs better than before. So essentially, I got a free sort of overhaul for my trouble. As for the HOA president, well, I did sue him for trespassing, for theft, destruction of property, and the illegal tow. He ended up paying his cousin for all of my truck repairs, lost his position in the HOA, and moved out of the neighborhood shortly after losing the lawsuit because he had no leg to stand on in court since everything was caught on CCTV. He pretty much surrendered to the asked-for settlement, which is why it didn't get drawn out. The HOA has not bothered me at all since that truck incident, and my neighbors love me for getting rid of the old HOA president, as he was a power-tripping narcissist to them all and kept issuing pointless fines that had to be regularly disputed. Also, I've been back to that junkyard for parts, but for my Camry instead, as I went to pull a replacement grill for it and found one in excellent shape there. They did recognize me, and they gave me some dirty looks, but otherwise they didn't bother me. Updates and more info from OP. One commenter says, if it was optional, was it a neighborhood association? Most HOA are mandatory as they run with the land, unless they were trying to annex you. Either way, kudos on blowing their HOA. And OP replies, from what I know, the HOA was originally set up as a volunteer association, probably to make it look more appealing. So that system remained for whatever reason, but they slowly got almost everyone else in the neighborhood to join. I'm told the HOA was actually pretty good until the current board took over, However, them booting out the president that I sued effectively neutered them. And I'm betting the board will all get replaced, since the current president that was elected after the last one was kicked out is way nicer. The rest of the board are old fat cats, and several of my neighbors have told me that they want to replace them in the next board election, which is happening soon. Commenter replies, "Why replace when you can dissolve the HOA? Just do it. Plant the idea." OP responds, "Believe me, I've heard that idea may be floating around, but since I'm not in the HOA, I'm not kept in the know about most details. But whatever happens, I'll try to update about it as the board elections are only weeks away." Next commenter says, "The fact that the junkyard owner made the HOA pay for all the repairs is probably the only reason those employees still have jobs. If they ever give you a hard time, maybe bring that up." And OP replies, "Yeah, but I'm betting that junkyard owner isn't really a very good person. Someone told me they heard he used to run a chop shop in the 90s and may still be doing that. I can't confirm or deny that though, which is why I didn't bother to include it. But yeah, it was just grand that the HOA president had to foot the bill to basically rebuild half of my truck." The update. Here's what happened after. The HOA board decided to wait till the next election to replace the president. But until then, the HOA itself were still the power-tripping fat cats that they were before, just a man short. They were leaving me alone, but the other people in the neighborhood, not so much. I was not the only one in the neighborhood not legally signed on to the so-called volunteer HOA, and the others who were being forced to pay despite lack of membership followed my example and stopped all payment, and then threatened to sue. There was some blowback from the board, like them saying that having paid anything to the HOA made them members. They countered with asking where the applications that they'd signed were. Of course, there wasn't any. The board was losing power, and they made it obvious how much they hated it. Finally, the board elections were coming, and the board basically pleaded with the neighborhood in various ways that things don't change aside from a new president being elected. There was a strong suspicion that these people were lining their own pockets with HOA money, so they were given an option of surrender. They refused and tried to keep their positions, but were all voted out. They did not leave the board willingly as they demanded an open recount of the ballots, which showed them that almost nobody voted for them. So they claimed the votes had been rigged against them and demanded a redo vote with a different system. Someone pointed out that they were just stalling for time by saying the voters cheated somehow, and then someone suggested a majority vote by hand raising at the meeting. And that showed, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the old fat cats were voted out. I heard that they chastised everyone, that they would destroy the neighborhood as they packed their stuff and left. The newly elected board and president then filed a motion to dissolve the volunteer HOA entirely, and the old fat cats were some of the only ones who voted against it. There were a few older residents who also tried to vote against it too, but the majority more than had it. The motion passed and the volunteer HOA was shut down. There was no investigation for embezzlement, but my neighbors didn't seem to care to get one started now that the HOA was disbanded. Personally, I would have moved forward with one, but I wasn't an HOA member, just a guy with popcorn on the sidelines. Since the disbandment around 2 months ago, at least 3 of the houses in the neighborhood have already been repainted in colors previously not approved. One of the former board members has put his house up for sale, and the fat cats have gotten a little slimmer, if you get my meaning. The house that had been rented out for the HOA office building was also sold to a new family that moved in. Just about everyone here is so much happier, except the fat cats and their very few supporters. The most power they have left is to yell at people to get off of their lawns now, and they seem to spend the bulk of their time either hiding at home or at their wine club. Yeah, I found out that they have a wine club. It really didn't surprise me much. You gotta love the justice. This is a classic story, and to hear that you actually had success in dissolving that HOA that was corrupt, it's awesome when we get some good justice like this right here. How do you handle this? Way to go. Freaking HOA Karen. I have the biggest Karen living in my neighborhood. So we bought our home 3 years ago. At the time of the purchase, we signed a set of bylaws for the subdivision that were laid out in the 60s when the neighborhood was being built. These rules included things like you couldn't have a separate building such as a shed, a pool house, carport, or garage. Now, several, and I would even go as far to say the majority of homes, including mine and my grandparents who moved in '77, have RV covers, we have carports, sheds or workshops, and the house across the street has a pool house. So, needless to say, the original bylaws were never upheld. In October of 2018, we had our little girl at 26 weeks and spent the next 4 months in NICU. In December, on one of the rare occasions that I came home, a neighbor came by with some paperwork saying that there was a house renting on Verbo and it needed to be taken care of. I needed to sign this paper and get it back to her by 12/31 so she could get it filed. I ignored the issue. I just don't care what someone else does with their property as long as it doesn't affect me, which this never did. The house was rarely rented out, and when it was always a really quiet one. I never heard anything, never saw trash thrown about, and so on. Anyway, apparently she gathered enough signatures to amend the original bylaws to include a ban on renting Verbo. She then took the homeowner, who lived in a different state by the way, to court, won, and had it put in the judgment that they had to sell their freaking house. So at this same time, she came up with the idea of starting an HOA. That way, our neighborhood could stay safe and be able to take care of any problems that would arise. No elaboration there. October of 2019, she then began collecting signatures to add a new amendment to include forming an HOA. She and another lady in our neighborhood who is a notary collected and notarized signatures. Once she believed that she had her 2/3 vote that she thinks she needed, she filed the paperwork. She had been having neighborhood meetings, and I know of 19 of 47 homeowners who were never notified of meetings, until I found out about one and I posted about a sign at the end of the entrance and exit of the subdivision. Once we all showed up at this meeting, we were informed that the HOA had passed, and we were all obligated to follow the rules and pay the dues that would be determined. I, along with the other 19 homeowners, made it very clear we were not part of any HOA and would not be participating or paying any dues. Shortly after this, I received an email saying that board members would be voted on via email and a $25 yearly due was due, and I could make my check payable to her name. Other homeowners received an email saying that there was a one-time initiation fee of $115 plus the $25 yearly due, and thanking them for their contribution for legal fees for taking the Verbo house to court. Like, how much money has this lady got out of people? All this to say, I checked her math multiple ways. Votes per lot, votes per fraction of a lot, votes per number of owners, like every stupid way possible. The only way I can think that I didn't do it was by value of the home to value of the entire subdivision. Anyway, she never had over a 60% vote in favor of starting a POA, or Property Owners Association, HOA. I've caught her out on it, and she refuses to acknowledge it. She is a real estate agent, and there are a couple of houses in the neighborhood for sale. I looked at the listings, and I noticed that one, who signed for the HOA, has association fees of $25. The other home, who did not sign for the HOA, does not have association fees listed. She's also now, well, I'm sorry, I don't know for sure who, someone has called the city on all of us heathens that won't sign the HOA. So the city has been writing warnings to almost everyone for something or another. Mine for a pile of brush left after cleaning out a flower bed, and my grass for being over 6 inches. Neighbor for a stack of tile in her driveway, and another for having a ladder and an inflatable boat on a dolly in their yard. Another for leaves in the ditch, and so many other crazy offenses. Obviously, she's calling the city because she knows the HOA can't do anything. Or at least she knows that we know she can't do anything. My concern is she's taking advantage of the elderly in the neighborhood that feel like the HOA is making them safe. She asked my elderly neighbor if she needed any groceries since she couldn't be getting out with all the COVID around. My neighbor said no, she was fine, and then the lady turned around and said, "Oh, okay, well, do you have your $25 for dues?" My neighbor's exact words were, "I gave it to her. I'm afraid of what she would do to me if I didn't." Not that she thought she was being physically threatened, but she literally thinks she could lose her home over not paying these bullies. Is there anything I can try to give or say to these elderly to make them not feel threatened by her or the other board members? I think that someone that specializes in HOA law would love to have a word with Karen. I think she is just trying to push people that she feels like won't stand up for themselves and take advantage of them. And then when somebody does and actually gets onto her, we'll take her down. What would you do? Lawyer up? The HOA president tows me. Your Honor, I'm no HOA member. Click the video on your screen to find out what happens to that nasty HOA, and I'll see you there.